Welcome, everybody, as the American Space Museum presents Stay Curious. I'm Mark Marquette, and so glad to have with me Steve Kane beside me. Hi, Steve.
Hello.
Steve Kane, it's Kane, and Steve was a space worker. He's got some great stories to tell you about the wonderful Space Shuttle program. Look at this behind us there, Steve, one of the orbiters going out to the pad, 39A or B, probably A. And we've got some space history for you today, including Steve worked on the return to flight STS-26 33 years ago today. We're going to talk about that. And this oral history with Steve Kane is brought to you by the Marie Louise G Endowment that we're so grateful for, to buy equipment to help us do things in a little fancier way than Marty Winkle and I did for a year. Marty's behind the camera and co-producing with Jessica Galloway, who has waved her magic wand and changed our whole look of Stay Curious. And Steve, you've been a fan of it since the beginning. It's changed a little bit, hasn't it?
It has. I am a big fan. I think what you're doing is fantastic.
Well, appreciate it. Steve is actually a friend of our museum, and we share an office space where his company SpaceTech is located. They certify space workers and aviation workers, and we're going to get into that. Because right now you're testing 60 aviation workers in Orlando, right?
We are, yes. As part of the Aviation Electronics Association, they have 4 conferences each year. They spread them around the U.S. This one is the Southeast Conference. It's in Orlando.
Mm-hmm.
And my partner, Carolyn Parise, certification manager, is over there right now conducting those tests. So.
And we share an office where we have our eBay presence. And from time to time, we'll be posting things that we are selling on eBay, but we've got about 90 items up there right now. And Steve loves it because he comes to work and he's in a space paradise. Everywhere you go, we've got stuff. It's pretty incredible what has walked through our door, because every bit of that eBay stuff we have in our SpaceTech shared building has walked through the door, Steve. It's kind of incredible.
Well, it has. And I get a kick out of watching you, with these artifacts, because, they're irreplaceable. These things are pieces of history that are just, there's no value that can be assigned to them. And to just see how you care for that and your interest in that, to me, is pretty special.
Well, thank you. It is fun. We're caretakers here at the whole museum of the birth of the American space age, and Steve was part of it in the shuttle era. Marty Winkle worked on the Grumman lunar module, and Jessica has got ties to Vandenberg with her and her husband. But we wanted to give a big birthday shout out while I'm thinking about it to Jessica's mom, Sherry Graves. Happy birthday to you. She's in Wichita, Kansas. She works for Spirit Aero Systems that you're familiar with.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I actually worked through Wichita State University on a grant. So
okay,
done a lot of work with Spirit, some of the production managers at Spirit, Boeing. Yeah.
Well, Sherry Graves, we hope you have a wonderful day. It's your day, and your daughter loves you and wishes you to have a great day. And your little brother's birthday. Oh, he's got to share a cake. I don't know if I'd be good at that. Well, we got another birthday coming up, but we're going to have a nice talk here with Steve Kane, who was a quality control inspector for NASA during the shuttle era, and he's got something to show us here in a little bit that was a big quality control issue about a third of the way in the program. But a couple of interesting things in history today, Steve. 60 years ago, the dinosaur contracts were issued. And you have to be a dinosaur to know what that is, okay?
That's
because in
time.
1961, on September 29th, the U.S. Air Force awarded contracts for the first concept of a space plane, and it was going to be launched on like an Atlas rocket or a Titan rocket, one of them. And but that never came to fruition. That was in 1961, 60 years ago. 10 years ago, China launched its first space station, Tiangong-1, and kept it up there for about 5 years, and then deorbited after 3 crews went up there. And guess what, Steve? They've got their Tiangong-2 Heavenly Palace is ready to accept the next crew out there. So, but also in space history, something that we'll kick off today. Whoop, don't want that way, that way, that way, that way. Well, there we go. We got out of sequence there. Is today in space history is the first Canadian satellite was launched at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and Steve's got affiliations with Vandenberg he's going to tell us about. 59 years ago, a Thor Agena rocket launched Canada's first satellite. You're looking at it here. It's called Alouette. They became the fourth nation on Earth to orbit an artificial satellite. Of course, behind Russia in October 57, their Sputnik 1. We followed 4 months later with in January 58 with Explorer 1. And the British were the third with Ariel 1 in April 62, just beating Canada into space. And you know what? This satellite worked for 10 years. It is still orbiting Earth about 500 miles high, where it will stay for at least another 1,000 years in space. Canada's first satellite. All right, now that's getting some bang for your buck. Jessica, we've got a comment from...
Ophelia's going to get mad at you. I want you to tell me the name of that satellite again.
Alouette.
Alouette.
Alouette, yes. And Ophelia's in Paris. Nice to see you. Au français. And I'm embarrassment to Marquette name, but that's 35 years in Appalachia, y'all. Okay. it's changed me a lot. I got the Buckeye in me where I say cricks and wash.
You call them pops?
But I call them pops, yep.
Okay.
And but now we're going to drink a soda.
Yeah.
All right, in there. So, Steve, where'd you grow up?
Grew up in mountains of central Idaho.
Did you?
Yes.
Okay.
Small town, pretty remote.
So what kind of dreams did you have as a kid that brought you to this fabulous career you've had in aviation and space technology?
Well, that's an interesting story. It wasn't really a dream. It was actually more of an order.
An order?
Yeah, the magistrate judge
Uh-oh.
in my local town gave me a choice. One of the choices was the military. The other choice was probably not anything I wanted to do, which was a boys ranch.
Uh-huh.
So I took the military option.
So you were a little precocious as a young man,
you're
saying, huh? Okay.
I was pretty hard to manage, yeah.
Okay. Well, they got Ritalin for stuff like that today.
They do,
so,
but
yeah.
back then, no, they didn't have any of that.
All right,
so.
right. They just threw us in a cage and said,
Yeah.
we hope you get better in
But,
there.
Yeah, the Navy really saved my life. It taught me a career. It taught me a skill, which led to my career. So I really, have to thank that judge.
What rank did you end up with in the Navy?
I was an E5 when I separated after 4 years. Aviation structural mechanic, working on
Yeah, we got a picture here, Marty, of the first how you got into the.
EA-6Bs. That's really what started my career.
Mm-hmm.
Was
the first airplane. That's a 1970s era plane.
Yep. It was called a Prowler. It's
Uh-huh.
a jammer aircraft built by Grumman, and was really what they used
All right.
to interrupt ground radar, whenever sorties were occurring. And so it was very electronics heavy aircraft, pretty heavy aircraft, had 4 seats in it, had a pilot, and then it had they call them ECMOs, electronic countermeasures officers, occupied the other seats. And my job was a structural mechanic, so I took care of all the structure on the aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
So anything that needed to be fixed structures-wise, access panels, a lot of corrosion
Seats,
control.
things like that, probably in and out.
Yeah,
Or-
in and out.
yeah.
But then the aircrew folks took care of all the others equipment. But mostly it was structures that I did. So a lot of sanding and painting and cleaning and Scotch-Brite. Went through
Right.
Pallets and pallets of Scotch-Brite. Get rid
Really?
of corrosion and yeah.
In there. Well,
So all that. So that's really how it all started for me.
well, good. And then, how did you jump into the the space shuttle era then?
Well, when I separated from the military, that really generated a love for aviation. And part of the skill set that I obtained in the Navy allowed me to take the airframe and power plant exam to become a licensed aircraft mechanic. And when I did that, actually as I was going through A&P school, because I had to do some of the power plant work before I could test for power plant. But the instructor in the course kind of pulled me aside one day and he said, I don't know what your plans are, but he said, if I was you, I would look at the airlines versus general aviation, because you can make a lot more money in the airlines than you can in general aviation. So when I left school, the first job I applied for was with a regional airline. That worked.
Mm-hmm.
I got the job, and I ended up, through the course of the next 8 or 9 years, working for 4 different airlines around the country.
Hmm.
And each step was a progression where I went from, floor mechanic to working different systems, a project lead, doing upgrades on aircraft. I went into quality assurance role there as a shift inspector, then became lead inspector. So, aviation at the time was my really my love, but that's what allowed me to then move into aerospace, because I was working in Santa Maria, California for an airline, Wings West Airlines, and anybody that flew in and out of Vandenberg was familiar with Wings West Airlines. It was the regional airline that flew, they're the only one, yeah. And so while I was working for them, one morning I picked up the newspaper and I was reading it, and this was before internet, so ads in the newspaper were something that you went through pretty regularly, and I saw this ad from Lockheed Space Operations Company that said, we've bid on a contract at Vandenberg to produce a West Coast launch site for the Space Shuttle. I thought, that's exactly what I thought. So I thought, well, there may be some opportunities there that I don't have in the airlines. So what they were looking for A&P mechanics specifically.
A&P means
airframe and power plant.
airframe and power plant. Okay.
Mechanics. So I put in an application. I filled out the application that was in the paper. I sent it into their office and didn't hear anything back. A year and a half later, I was actually working out in Merced, California at a maintenance base that we had out there. And I got a letter from Lockheed saying, we have a position if you're interested, we'd like to interview you. So I went back to Santa Maria from Merced and interviewed and was hired, and then moved back to Santa Maria and began working on Slick 6 at Vandenberg as a quality inspector, working the systems activation that we were doing at the time. And Lockheed won the contract from Martin Marietta. Martin had done the initial work on the pad, but there was a lot of work that had to be done to get it activated. And we uncovered a lot of problems. Things had to be fixed. The initial cold flows, part of the propellant for the shuttle program is liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen. And those are stored in storage areas with interconnecting piping, to bring them to where they are used on the launch site. And all of these were built from specific materials, Invar specifically. And the first cold flow that we did in those facilities, they ran liquid nitrogen through the systems to cold shock everything and see how it worked. And they discovered that all the bellows, because those expand and contract, all the bellows were made out of the wrong material.
Oh.
And it ruined every one of them.
Oh.
Every bellows contorted out of shape. And so we had to go back in and rebuild the entire complex and fix all those problems. So there were a lot of problems. We did have the first flight set of boosters stacked on the launch site out there. It wasn't like here where you have a mobile launcher platform that's in the VAB. You put the shuttle on that, you roll it out to the pad. At Vandenberg, they had a launch mount. It was a fixed location. So everything was stacked on the launch mount, and the buildings actually moved to cover the launch mount. So they opened up, they closed up. They had a shuttle assembly building, they had a payload change-out room, and they had a mobile service tower that completed that enclosure. And then all of those, when it was time for launch, they moved away. And so,
sorry I didn't bring a picture of Vandenberg. Got one in our office over there. Vandenberg, for those of you who don't know of the shuttle's 30-year history, was going to be an alternate site. And Steve, tell us why. Where were they going to use the Space Launch Pad number 6, which they called Slick 6?
Yeah, Space Launch Complex 6 was the military's manned space program, and it actually, Slick 6 was rebuilt after the Manned Orbiting Laboratory, which the Air Force started.
The MOLE, yes.
The MOLE project. They moved away from that. They moved to shuttle, and everything was pretty well built and tested already. We had the flight stacks there with the boosters and the tank. We're only waiting for Discovery. Discovery was the orbiter that was earmarked for the military, and
the Air Force were essentially going to buy Discovery, but why Vandenberg?
Well, Vandenberg allows a different orbit to launch into, a polar orbit, which is more difficult to attain here on the East Coast. On the West Coast, it just gave them additional strategic opportunities, I suppose, which was one of the reasons they wanted to launch from there.
But also going north and south up the East Coast was more dangerous than going up north towards Alaska.
Where Vandenberg's located is the furthest west westernmost point on the continental U.S.
Mhm.
So they were really, it was a prime location for doing that kind of work.
So it was a spy satellite launch pad, basically.
And actually, yeah, when
but
you
of
talk
course
about,
they just launched the Landsat 9, which is agricultural and ecological and stuff.
what was interesting about the arrangement for the orbiter, it was at a facility called V-19,
V-19,
which was on the north base where the runways were,
Uh-huh.
and then Slick 6 was on the south base. And Vandenberg is split by a state highway. So to get to the south base, you have to leave the north base, go through a gate, go down the state highway to the coast, and then take a left
They
and
fixed that.
go on out to. Did they?
They moved the gate. It's straight out.
Oh, okay.
It's straight out.
'Cause it was quite a
It's an adventure.
manipulation. It was
And
an
this is
adventure to get there.
1978, 79,
This was
80
actually 85, 80,
85-ish. Okay.
85, 86.
Okay, the
Yeah.
shuttle era had started, and this
The other
is,
thing that was really cool was the road that went out to Slick 6, the hills on each side of the road were too tall for the orbiter. So they had to come in and lop the tops of those hills off so the wings would clear as they went out.
I've seen
and the-
pictures of that. Yeah.
Weird. It's
And the-
unnatural.
The orbiter transporter vehicle that they used here actually came from Vandenberg. And all of the equipment that went into what was then the OMRF, which is Orbiter Maintenance and Refurbishment Facility, and became OPF-3, came from V-19 at Vandenberg. It was all loaded on a barge. They went around through the Panama Canal, brought it up here, and then all that equipment was moved in. That actually, when I came back to the space program after Challenger, I was laid off from Vandenberg. Everybody was let go out there. So I went back to the airlines for a couple of years, and while I was working in Illinois for an airline, up there, I got a call from my mother, actually. And my mother said, I had an interesting call from Lockheed today, and they have a position for you if you want to call them back, and here's your number, because that was my permanent number that I gave them when I was laid off. And so they offered me the position here in Florida, and I took it.
So you came here, and we're going to get into that in a minute. You were actually got drawn back in from the commercial aviation
did.
for the return to flight of STS-26 that happened 33 years ago today. We're going to talk a minute about that. But Steve, you're a fan of our show here. Can you believe we heard yesterday from a person in India, Gurdaspur, India, Longia Sani. Hi, Longia Sani from India. We've got a good friend of mine, Cliff Watson, watches from Sonoma, Queensland, Australia. Maddie Haven, hello to you in the UK. Dean Babcock was watching the other day. And Graham Shaw is another name that's popped up there on our Stay Curious comments, along with dozens of others that watch it every day. And we're so grateful for that because, as Steve knows, our proud nonprofit for 20 years has been preserving the birth of the space age that he was involved in, and now inspiring this next generation that you're working with. And we're going to talk about that next generation in detail. It's so interesting that you're testing people now for the careers that you once had.
Correct.
And has it changed a lot, the landscape in this 30 years of technology?
Well, it has. Shuttle was old technology. When you think about the orbiter and the solid rocket boosters and the external tank, conceived in the 60s, designed in the 70s, and built in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s. So, by the time it was actually produced and in place and operational, it was already old technology. When you think about technology changing every 4 or 5 years, we actually did several modifications through the life of the program to bring the orbiters up to current technology, such as the glass cockpit, and other things that were done. That was kind of a continuous process. But as we certify the next generation of SpaceTech or spacecraft workers, it's important that we stay in touch with technology. And a lot of the new space companies have done things a little bit different than the traditional NASA way of doing business. And so the paradigm has changed. We've seen the cost to space get reduced dramatically as a result of that paradigm shift. Landing boosters, that was something that NASA dreamed about, but was never through the course of the shuttle program able to accomplish. We see that as a pretty regular feat now with SpaceX.
Yeah, they're pressing their 100th one there. In fact, Steve, to your left there, and Marty might zoom in over there in our little corner over there, are two 5,000-pound thrust fuel cells for the Via Space, Brevard County's hometown rocket company,
Fiber wound.
led by astronaut Sid Gutierrez. Plastic fuel in those babies, and there's no sign warning. We didn't have a convoy bring it in here. It's just laying there because we're going to have a Via Space room. They're going to be partners here. All built with 3D printers,
Yes.
by the way.
And that's actually the only rocket engine produced that uses 3D printed fuel.
Yeah,
Which
Via
is-
Space, and they're going to
which
launch
is a
rockets
pretty
with
neat
plastic
Achievement.
and laughing gas, basically. But we want to segue just for a minute here before we start talking about the historic flight 33 years ago got another birthday today, not just Jessica's mom, Sherry Graves, but we've got another birthday today. And as I hit this and go there, today is the 79th birthday of this gentleman, NASA Administrator Bill Nelson. His birthday today. Happy birthday, Bill. There's his NASA Administrator picture there. There's his handprints, okay? All right. Yep. That looks good,
Tilt it
okay.
back just a little bit.
Yeah, there you go. You can see the imprint on. This is what our museum's all about, is these bronze handprints were harvested by our board of directors, Chairman Charlie Mars, and there's a little shine on it there to see him there. To commemorate our Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo astronauts at Spaceview Park, and Bill Nelson was at one of the events that Charlie harvested a couple Apollo guys, so we got his on there, and it's really cool. These are very heavy, and we've got Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. We got Sally Ride in the museum, Eileen Collins, whose new book helped written by our friend Jonathan Ward's out today, and Kathy Sullivan's in the building too. America's first woman to do a spacewalk. Bill Nelson went to space 3 weeks before the Challenger accident. If I got another picture, there's Bill's handprints there with my hands on them. And he considers himself a passenger, he doesn't brag about being a full-flung astronaut or anything. He considers himself a passenger. Of course, Jake Garn was the first non-citizen to go up, and he was a senator from Utah. And then Nelson went up, and he wrote a book, Mission: An American Congressman's Voyage to Space. And NASA's 14th administrator. He's a Democrat senator from Florida and was in the House of Representatives for about 20 years. And you, of course, know this gentleman living here in Florida. And we've got him as the administrator, Pam Melroy as the assistant deputy administrator, and Bob Cabana is third in charge.
Yeah.
Seems like our space program's in pretty good hands. What do you think?
I think so. Yeah, I think the leadership is there. Those folks have all had a deep history. With all the work that's been done, especially here at the Kennedy Space Center. So yeah, I think it's in good hands.
I mean, you're no stranger to the politics of space, I'm sure, when it comes to budgets and spending money. And
Yeah, I've done a fair amount of work with budgets here in the last few years, especially after moving to SpaceTech.
mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about SpaceTech, let's talk about this crew, SpaceTech's, 33 years ago, this is what our heroes looked like.
Yeah.
These were the men that were taking us back to space after 20 months in the anguish of the Challenger accident. And they saw 7 of their friends lose their lives. And they flew in these blue suits, basically. And this was the first all-veteran crew since Apollo 11 in 1969. And this is 1988, okay. And it was led by Fred Houck, who's 80 years old. Hope he's enjoying today. These photographs are by Mark or Tom Usiak, have sent us this picture, these photographs. Friends of our museum, you've heard us talk about them.
Yes.
There, that looks better. I like that, Jessica. Also, Dick Covey is 75. Dick Covey is the second man there on the left in the orange suit. It's the first time they wore space suits since STS-4, all right? They just flew in like oak coveralls thinking it was safe as could be, and the orange pumpkin suits become in vogue. Dick Covey, who's 75, was actually on Capcom and said the words "go at throttle up" 70 seconds after launch, and then shuttle blew up. Very famous shocked look on his face and all the footage you see of that. John Lounge is deceased. He was a member of this crew. Pinky Nelson is 71, and David Hilmars is also 71. And no doubt they're reliving this moment in history when everybody's hearts were pounding, because you were one of the space workers of thousands, and these 5 men had the entire American space program on their shoulder.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that's any sort of exaggeration. You lived it. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. You know, that was paramount in getting the U.S. back into space, you know, and that was the reason I moved to Florida, was to be involved in that. You know, the 2 years I was at Vandenberg gave me a real taste of the space industry. Going back to the airlines, I missed that. So the opportunity to come back here to Florida and join in this effort. I was actually working in the firing room when this launch occurred, because I worked firing room at Vandenberg as well.
Mm-hmm.
One of the jobs that I did.
So Marty was in the room too,
Yep.
at LC-12 for launch process services there. So you guys were in the same
Yep.
firing room and didn't know each other probably,
No,
did you?
we didn't.
And here's that beautiful launch. Thank you, Tom Uziak, or his brother Mark. They'll hand wrestle to figure out who took it there.
That is a nice shot.
And this would have been film photography back then, folks, not digital. So even more challenging. Gorgeous launch there.
Yep, those are the loud and proud days.
Those are the loud and proud. What did you miss that you wanted to come back when Lockheed called you to come back for this important mission? What were you missing?
You know, me being an aircraft mechanic, you know, I worked on a lot of different aircraft, you know, in my time there, but the space shuttle program, the orbiter, to me was the ultimate airplane. More of a cross between a pressurized aircraft and a submarine than anything. And it was just really an opportunity to get back involved in that. Just the fact of watching those vehicles go into space is something that you never really get over.
Mm-hmm. And being
And so
part
that's-
of it,
and-
like
and being part of it, yeah.
you and Marty were there. And there's another gorgeous shot. I'm going to blow that up there. Just another, wow, that's a unique angle there.
Yeah.
That's got to be 39A, because I recognize the row on the left there, a fence from
just
the
on the wall.
SpaceX launches, I think, there. And rolls over. Has to do this maneuver to get its heading up there. I always thought that was weird, that it wasn't flying on the top, it flew on the underneath. And then and there's that back launch there, and the gorgeous launch there, and take us out. What were the challenges of that day 33 years ago? All right, with everybody's hearts in their throat. What was that like?
Well, working in the firing room, you know, there was a lot of excitement. You know, we were console monitor quality control was what our title was. And so we were actually in a room kind of off of the main firing room. And our role was to follow along in the procedures, make sure that everything was accomplished as it was called out. And if there were any deviations or anything that was different, you know, to let the launch team know that. So we were, you know, involved right up until, you know, the point of launch and after, when they achieved orbit. And so we celebrated right along with everybody else, you know, when that occurred. It was a pretty neat moment.
9 minutes to orbit, and it certainly was, and got us back on track. And we're going to talk more about this with Triple T on Friday, when yes, Travis Thompson will be back to do Tales from the White Room on Friday. Talk to him today.
He's a good man.
He's a good man. You knew Triple T. Everybody, when I said something about Travis Thompson to him, he goes, "Oh, Triple T," and because it's Travis Todd Thompson, and he's had a bout of illness and feeling a lot better, and he'll be back in the saddle here on Stay Curious to give you some wonderful tales from the White Room. And there's a couple anomalies in the White Room about this mission that you want to stick around and see. But I love teasing Steve here that he's the only man I know that has a building named after him, okay? This is the Kane Technology Wing in Nunez Community College in Chalmette,
Chalmette, yeah, it's actually
Chalmette,
almost a suburb
Louisiana,
of New Orleans.
suburb of New Orleans. So I think that's so cool. They sent the janitor out there to take this picture because there's the hose in the yard he's dragging out there.
Power washing.
Power wash.
Getting the water out of it.
Steve, how cool and how did this happen?
Well, it's an interesting story about Nunez. Yeah, it actually happened because we have at SpaceTech we've had a partnership with Boeing for many years, and the manager of training at Michoud, NASA Michoud Assembly Facility, is a friend of ours, and he reached out to us and said, Boeing is interested in ensuring that we have a continuous pipeline of skilled labor here at Michoud, and there is no entity, no educational entity that could do that, and we were wondering if you could help us with that. And so we gathered up a team, we brought in a facilitator, we went down to Nunez, we brought in the Boeing folks, the production managers and the training managers to find out exactly what they were interested in this training to be accomplishing. We built that set of competencies for them. And in the SpaceTech archives, one of the things that we've done at SpaceTech is we captured the entire shuttle certification and training database from the shuttle era, everything that it took to train and certify everybody that worked, touch labor on those vehicles. And we have that now in a searchable database, and it allows us to customize programs as the needs arise. And the need was there at Michoud. They wanted to ensure that they had a continuous supply of technicians. So they worked with us to build that capability at Nunez. But one of the things that happened at Nunez, it's kind of a hurricane alley in New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
And Katrina came through, did a lot of damage, but it was Hurricane Isaac actually that came through and did most of the damage there at Nunez. And it really wiped out their facilities, and they had to rebuild. And at the same time, Boeing was interested in putting some advanced training in, because Nunez traditionally served the marine industry and the petroleum industries, petroleum storage, those type of operations. They didn't have much to do with space.
Mm-hmm.
And at Michoud, they're building the center section for SLS.
Mm-hmm.
That's their primary role. And so they wanted these students to be trained in those competencies, those skill sets that they needed. And we had a lot of surplus equipment. SpaceTech in 2007 transitioned away from what was then Brevard Community College, and we moved into our own entity as a credentialing agency. So we no longer did training. So we had a lot of excess equipment, surplus equipment. And so I was able to palletize this equipment and send it out to Nunez to replace a lot of the stuff they had that was damaged, but also to give them a head start on putting all this together.
Wow. And they honored you with that building
And so
there.
I was surprised. I saw the news release on that building, and so I sent a message to the program manager out there and said, that's a pretty interesting name. What a coincidence. And he said, well, no coincidence, named after you. Went, oh, who knew? Yeah.
All right.
So that was pretty cool. And they're doing really good now. Most of their students go to work at Michoud. At last count, they had 120 students in the pipeline. They have several that are working there at Michoud for Boeing and for other contractors. So it's a pretty successful program. It's doing really well.
We're going to talk a little more about SpaceTech here with Steve Kane, who's the executive director of this company that certifies aerospace and aviation people and in the technical things. I've got the booklet here that they do all kinds of certification. They've been credited for over 10 years to supply this service. The FAA Office of Commercial Space says that you can develop curriculums and performance-based certifications for technicians engaged in space vehicle manufacturing operations. And these are the good jobs that are out there right now. We're going to,
Exactly.
but these oral histories made possible by the Marie Louise G Endowment that we're grateful for, and we'll be bringing you more people. And what Steve's at the very focus of right now is what we showed in the headlines yesterday, Steve.
Yep.
2,000 jobs coming to Brevard County for a company called Terrain Orbital that's going to build 1,000 satellites a year.
Yes.
And what do you know about the backstory on this?
Well,
Anything?
we work pretty closely with Space Florida.
Space Florida.
And
We
Space
talked about
Florida-
yesterday's the government agency in our state
Yeah.
that is tasked to bring in space business. Dale Ketchum's been on our show, and
Yeah, Dale's a huge proponent. Dale's done a lot of work behind the scenes to help bring these in. Linda Weatherman at the Economic Development Commission of the Space Coast has also done a tremendous amount of work attracting these companies in. When you think about what's occurred here, since Shuttle retired, we went through a fairly lengthy drought where we lost a tremendous chunk of our tax base. A lot of people moved away, and part of the reason for the companies coming here was that supply of skilled labor. But one of the issues was most of the supply didn't exist. The schools in the area don't have large enough facilities, and they can't produce enough students to meet demand. And so companies now have to resort to pretty expensive hiring practices where they offer incentives for people to move here. They provide them moving bonuses, relocation bonuses, and different things to bring them here. It was projected that the need between 2020 and 2030 was going to be over 10,000 technicians here, and that's pretty significant. But you need
in a
the ability
10-year
to produce
period.
them.
Wow.
You need the ability to produce them, and it just wasn't here. So one of the things we've done is we partnered with an individual out of the Tampa Bay area, a gentleman by the name of Brian Cam, who's the founder of the Space Coast Consortium Apprenticeship Program. And Brian actually came into our orbit when he was brought over by RUAG Space, which RUAG Space builds the skeleton, the structure for Airbus OneWeb satellites.
RUAG, huge in Europe. They built most of the
they're a
buses,
big
which is the
facility over there.
foundation. They call the satellite is the bus. RUAG's been involved in that as well as the dispensing compartments for multiple
they do a lot of
satellites going
composite
out.
structure manufacturing, and their facility is actually in the Titusville Logistics Facility,
Yeah,
which is
it is.
just south of the city of Titusville. And they do a lot of good work, and they brought Brian over because it was really site selection, what they were contracting with him to do. And so as part of that, Brian conducted several town hall meetings. He stopped in at SpaceTech and met us when we were in Cape Canaveral, and had this idea that there needs to be an entity to oversee the development of this apprenticeship program. So SpaceTech, through our board of directors, we discussed it, we took on that role, and we've now produced frameworks that are approved through the state of Florida for 3 different occupations. So we have apprenticeships for mechatronics technician, for advanced machining, and also for fiber composite technician. When you showed Via Space's